What's going on, everybody? This is Sailboat from Sailboat.Sneakers here, and I'm back at you with another customization project. I've had these two pairs of dead stock shoes sitting around for a little while, and because they are both like triple white or all white colorways, I decided that I was going to spruce them up a little bit, and I'm going to add a little bit of color to them by dyeing them entirely. I have first this pair of size 8 triple white Adidas NMDs, and I have this pair of size 13 Nike Roshe runs. What I'm going to do today is a dye job on both of them. I'm basically going to give them like a kind of rainbow vibe and utilize my RIT dye. If you guys have followed the channel at all and you've watched any of my previous customization projects, you know that I tend to utilize RIT dye quite a bit. It's a really effective dye that I've had a lot of good luck with. Today, I'm gonna give it a shot using a boiling method so I can hopefully set the colors in a little bit better. At any rate, it's time to get into it. So let's go put some water on the stovetop to let it start boiling and basically get these shoes submerged and colored. The first step in this project was getting the water boiling hot so then I could add my dye. RIT dye tends to work best when it's at a very hot, almost boiling temperature. And in order to do this project, I did the entire dye as a hot dye. Now, this is something that for this kind of sneaker probably was not the best idea because, as many of you probably know, extreme heat actually affects the way that glue bonds continue to hold between the midsoles and the uppers of the shoe, as well as between the midsoles and the outsoles of the shoe. Unfortunately, as I was dyeing throughout this project, I started to recognize that there was some pretty significant sole separation that was actually happening in between the midsoles and the uppers of the shoe. By the time that I realized it, it was kind of too late and there really was no turning back, so I just continued to dye the shoes as best as I could. Originally, I was going to go for a rainbow look on both of the shoes, but I found out that the way that the dye was absorbing into the shoes, it was going to be incredibly challenging to work with more than two colors and mixing them together to create a nice gradient. So I opted into just utilizing two different colors on each shoe that I dyed. As you can tell on the NMDs, I went with a yellow and a blue, so it was a gradient from a yellow to a green to a blue. And as you'll see right now, I'm actually mixing in some red dye that I ended up utilizing on the Roshe runs. So on the Roshe runs, it's a little bit more of a sunset type of coloration with a dye that goes from a yellow to an orange to a red. Unfortunately, with the red dye, I didn't utilize the synthetic dye, so the colors actually didn't sit quite as well. That's one of the big learning experiences that I had throughout this process, and I definitely will remember to utilize only the synthetic RIT dyes in the future because they tend to hold color a lot better after all of the cleaning processes are completed. Well, that certainly did not go to plan at all whatsoever. All I gotta say is thank goodness that I am experimenting with this technique on a couple pairs of shoes that were not gonna sell for a ton of money, because otherwise I might have been really upset about what just happened. Quite honestly, I really should have thought about this before I even got involved with this project, but it's something that hindsight is kind of 20/20. One of the major issues that you guys probably saw during the time-lapse sequence during the dyeing process is that I actually ended up separating the midsoles from the uppers on both pairs. This is something that I probably should have thought about beforehand with this project. The separation is a little bit worse on the Adidas NMDs. You can see that the entire front portion at the toe cap of the shoe is detached on both sides. So realistically, I'm gonna let these sit overnight and I'm gonna have to go through tomorrow, detach the midsoles from the uppers, clean off the uppers and the midsoles, wash the uppers in the washing machine, and then I'm gonna have to go ahead and re-glue the uppers to the midsoles. What was supposed to be a quick and easy and fun project turned out to be anything but. This is going to be insanely challenging. It's just one of those projects where I expected it was gonna be in and out and no problems whatsoever. And I haven't even been working on them for like an hour and I'm already running into problems, which is crazy to think of. No sweat, I'm just gonna have to let them dry overnight, and then tomorrow I'm gonna have to get through and separate everything. All right, now that I've let these pairs dry overnight, they are ready to go for the next part of the process, which is adding some color fixative. RIT makes a product called color fixative, which you basically pour in and boil the same exact way as you would with their dyes, and you submerge your item for however long you need to. Typically they recommend for like 10 to 20 minutes. Basically, all I do is follow the instructions on the bottle. What I'm going to do during this process is utilize my squirt bottle of acetone so I can actually remove the midsoles during the dyeing fixative process. Because of the fact that there's so much separation going on, I'm just gonna do a complete reglue on both pairs. It's good practice for me, and the shoes are gonna need it after this. That's my own fault. It's a learning process. This is an entirely new customization that I've never done before. So there's bound to be a couple of bumps in the road as we go through. At any rate, let's get these colors fixed in and let's get the midsoles detached from both of these pairs. The next step in this process was to utilize some RIT color fixative to allow the dye to set deeper into the uppers. Throughout this process, because I also used a boiling method again, I was able to get the shoes hot enough to where the glue continued to break down. As the glue continued to break down, I utilized my squirt bottle of acetone to spray small little squirts in order to break down the glue even further and help to separate the uppers from the midsoles. It turned out to be a pretty easy process of separation, but once the shoes were separated, it was time to get down to prep work. In order to create a strong bond with new glue between the uppers and the midsoles, it's absolutely imperative that you remove all of the old excess glue. In order to do this, I utilized acetone and cotton balls as well as my heat gun. The heat continued to break down the bond of the glue, and utilizing the cotton balls with acetone, I was able to wipe down these midsoles to get them absolutely spotless of any of the old remaining glue, so then that way they were ready for a reglue. With the boost, I was extra careful because if you utilize too much acetone, you can actually damage the boost, and obviously if you want to get the cleanest product possible, you want the least amount of damage possible. Because of this, it took me a lot longer to clean off the boost midsoles, but it turned out pretty nicely and I was able to get the majority of the glue off. As I was working on the uppers of the NMDs, I failed to realize that there's actually a protective coating over the stitching, so cleaning off the first upper actually took a significantly longer period of time because I was trying to remove the protective layer from all of the stitching. In hindsight, I definitely didn't need to do this, but it didn't really hurt anything as far as the final product was concerned. With the Roshe runs, these were pretty easy to clean off. I did realize that there was some sort of harder ridge along the stitching, which actually made it a lot easier to complete the reglue on this. And I wish that most shoes had this because it created really nice lines so that I knew where to apply my glue, and afterwards I knew where to press down to get the bond between the midsole and the uppers just right. So the prep process definitely took a lot longer than I was expecting. It took a ton of time to clear off all of the old excessive glue from both of these pairs and the midsoles. But now that all the glue is cleared up, it's time to finally get down into the actual re-glue on both of these pairs. So that's what I'm going to be doing now. This has always proved to be a pretty challenging task, but had a little bit of practice under my belt, so I think that we're about ready for it. Let's take a closer look at both of these pairs so you guys can see what they look like without the excessive glue, and then we'll get into the re-gluing process. So taking a closer look at these pairs of shoes here, we'll look at the Roshe runs first. The midsoles are looking super crisp. These are pretty easy to strip all the excess glue from. The only challenging spot was trying to get all of the excess glue out of these little holes that were in the midsole. But even then, just using a Q-tip that was dipped in a little bit of acetone got the glue off pretty easily. Even the toe portion here, the glue came off really nicely, which I expected to be a lot more challenging than it was. Moving to the uppers, you can see that all of the glue was removed successfully. One of the things that I did notice about these uppers is that along the brim of the stitching, there's actually this kind of harder mesh portion. I think that they probably used some sort of glue or some other sort of chemical to kind of harden and stiffen up that area to create a stronger bond in between the upper and the midsole. I was also able to successfully reshape these heel portions utilizing my heat gun and just a little bit of pressure from my hands. They are now in a much better cup position than they were before. The uppers, even though the color has faded slightly with the washes and all the work that has been done, they're still looking pretty good. Both of these uppers are in very good shape at this point in time and 100% ready to be re-glued. Moving on to the NMDs, these actually proved a lot more challenging to get rid of all of the excess glue. One of the things that I noticed, very similarly to Yeezy 350s that I've worked on in the past, is these actually had a protective layer over the stitching. Now you'll notice that I did leave that protective layer on the stitching on the left shoe, but on the right shoe, I removed it all the way. I probably should not have removed it because it's not going to affect the re-glue at all. But unfortunately I thought that it was just the old glue, so I did strip it all away using some acetone and some heat. Other than a little bit of damage to the stripes where they will be attaching underneath the boost, these things turned out really nicely and are definitely ready for a re-glue. I am going to have to give these a little bit of extra attention because I'll have to re-glue down all of these portions of the 3 stripes that have kind of popped up off of the uppers. Overall, the uppers look really clean. And the midsoles are actually looking really good too. Now with boost, you don't want to overdo the utilization of acetone because it will damage the boost component of the shoe. And you can see a couple of spots where that was the case up in the front here. However, overall, I was able to preserve the integrity of these midsoles really nicely, and they are definitely ready to be re-glued. Now that you guys have seen what both of these pairs look like when they're all cleaned up, it's time to get our glue on. So let's go ahead and we will get into the glue application and then the bonding of the uppers to the midsoles. The gluing process is pretty boring, but you can just see that I apply thin, even coats of my glue to both the upper and the midsole. Throughout the course of this process, I actually applied several layers of glue. I think I ended up utilizing 2 layers on both of the midsoles as well as the uppers, but I was especially careful to make sure that the edges were coated up really nicely. When I actually went to re-glue the shoes, I used some wooden tree shoes from Men's Warehouse that helped to keep the shape of the toe box. I started off by gluing the toe first, and then I did the heel cup second. That way the shoe was definitely going to line up appropriately, and then I did spot glues along the medial and lateral sides to get it just right. After I finished up with the Roshe runs, it was time to hit the NMDs. With the NMDs, you have to be a little bit more careful with the glue on the bottom of the uppers because of the holes that are in the back. You just don't want to have too much over glue going through those holes because otherwise it can spill onto the inside of the shoe. Gluing the NMDs was a bit more challenging because there aren't really as many defined lines as to where your glue needs to go, so you need to make sure that you have a really good alignment. As you can see, I actually had to switch over from my Barge Super Stick cement to Barge Infinity cement. Shout out to the homie Gil over at Sneakerhead Worldwide for the hookup. I ran out of glue as I was gluing the midsoles, and I really needed to finish them up all at once, and my new shipment of glue isn't going to be coming in until a week after I finalized this project. So it was really important that I got all the glue on there in one session so that I didn't have to worry about the shoe sitting there for an extended period of time without being heat activated and have to redo the entire process. Heat activating the glue and actually getting the bond between the upper and the midsole of the NMDs proved to be a lot more challenging, unfortunately. Because of the way that the uppers match up with the midsole, it kind of made the shoe banana a little bit. So it had this kind of curved appearance to it. Luckily, with the shoe trees from Men's Warehouse, I was able to kind of straighten out the shoes a little bit more, and I left the shoe trees in there for a couple of days so that the shoes were able to flatten out a little bit. Once the gluing was all complete, it was time to get the laces on, and now I'm about to take you guys on a view of the final product here. Alright, now that both of these pairs have been glued back together, the project is finally complete. Unfortunately, what I thought was going to be a quick and fun hour-long project turned into a project that probably took closer to 10 hours because of all the re-gluing stuff that I had to do. I'm not upset about it because it was a really good learning experience, but at the same time, it feels a little bit like a waste of time because these pairs are obviously not highly sought-after pairs, so the amount of work that I had to put into them to make them wearable is probably not going to be worth the price that they end up selling for in the end. But it was a really good learning experience, and the only way that I'm going to continue to get better with my restoration and customization work is if I keep practicing and keep doing it. At any rate, I want to show you guys close up so you can see what the final product looks like here. Let's take a closer look. Starting off with the NMDs, taking a look at the right shoe, you can see that the dye job turned out pretty good and actually dyed the boost too, which is pretty cool. I really like how these pods actually stayed relatively white. One thing that you'll notice is that there's a little bit of damage to the pod there from when I was applying heat during the gluing process. They become very kind of impressionable, so if you're pressing into it, that will actually stay, and you can almost see my fingerprint in there, which is kind of unfortunate. Now you can see that the glue lines are pretty even for the most part. There are some parts of the white 3 stripes at the bottom that got a little bit damaged during the removal and cleaning process. It doesn't look bad, it just kind of gives it a little bit of a worn look, which is unfortunate seeing as it's a dead stock shoe. Coming around to the toe, unfortunately my glue lines weren't exactly perfect, so you can see that they're not matched up 100%, but it still looks pretty good. The toe actually looks pretty solid, but then as we come onto the medial side, you can see that the upper almost started to pull away from the midsole just because of the fact that I didn't keep my pressure on there long enough. And that's actually a pattern that you can see as we go through the entire medial aspect of the shoe, unfortunately. Now that's not going to ruin the integrity of the glue at all. It's just kind of unsightly. Coming onto the back, looking pretty good. Now these shoes did banana a little bit, so I put my shoe trees in there for a couple of days, and it's looking relatively straight again. A little bit of this unfortunate curve, but overall it looks pretty good, and I'm happy with it. Onto the left shoe here, you can see I had a little bit of a similar problem. I didn't get the glue line absolutely 100%. It still looks good, but again, it's just a bit unsightly. Won't ruin the integrity of the shoes, it just, it doesn't look as good as I want it to. Continuing to come on the lateral side, still some of that kind of pulling of the glue issue. You can see as I press it that it's still holding really nicely. It just doesn't look as good as it could. This block right here actually matched up pretty damn nice. And then coming over onto the medial aspect of the shoe, you can see that this block also matched up pretty nice with just a little bit of a pull where you can see the glue. The medial side of the shoe actually looks pretty good here. Very minimal damage to the 3 stripes. And as I come over onto the toe, again, I just didn't hold down and bond the surfaces to one another quite as long as I needed to. Right here is a little bit of damage in the boost that actually happened during the removal process. A little bit unsightly, but again, doesn't affect the integrity of the shoe. You can see that this one also a little bit of a curvature to it right here, and you can see the impression of my fingerprint on that front block, but overall it looks pretty good. The colors came out really nicely. They look pretty even from shoe to shoe, and I'm pretty happy with the overall outcome of this. Moving on to the Roshe runs here, the glue attachments that I have are solid. And like I was mentioning, that kind of harder portion gave me really good lines to re-glue with. So the glue lines on this shoe are actually pretty good, minus a couple of spots like right here on the lateral aspect. Coming onto the heel of the shoe, you can see how the heel cup is a little bit bent right there. I did try to work it out as best as I could after the boiling process, but just didn't come out quite as good as I wanted it to. The glue lines over on the medial aspect of this shoe look damn near perfect, and I'm actually really pumped with how well this one turned out. The left shoe, again, the integrity, really good. Glue lines, pretty solid, not too much that I messed up too badly. You can see this portion of the shoe, which I kind of damaged during the removal of the upper to the midsole, but it doesn't look too bad. And as I continue to come onto the back of the shoe, overall my line stayed pretty consistent on this one until we get over onto the medial side. There's a few parts where the glue lines don't match up 100%, but it still looks pretty good. The dye job definitely lightened up quite a bit more because of this material and the fact that I didn't use the RIT synthetic dye for the red because I didn't have it at the store. But overall, looks like a pretty good product, and I'm very, very happy with the way that these turned out. Again, the color is pretty even from side to side. It doesn't look unbalanced or anything like that. And although it was a pretty challenging project, I'm pretty pumped with the results. Now that you guys have had the opportunity to see the final product for my Adidas NMD dyed customs and my Nike Roshe Run dyed customs, I hope that you have a better idea of the effort that it takes to go into customizing a pair like this. Even though I don't necessarily think that the return money-wise is going to be there, it was a great project, and I hope that you guys get a little bit more insight into the amount of effort that I put into projects, even if they're not especially hype projects like these. At any rate, this was a really great customization effort. I learned quite a bit, and overall it was a great learning experience. I appreciate you guys that tuned in for this video, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below which of the two you like better. If you guys are looking for any of the inventory I have in stock, you can check out www.Sailboats.Sneakers.com. The link for that, of course, will be in the bio. You can also find me on Instagram at Sailboats.Sneakers, and I'm also on Twitter at Sailboats.Sneaks. Thank you guys who stuck around until the cold, bitter end of this video. I'm Sailboat, and I'm out of here.